Hey everyone, just a quick note, the YouTube version of this podcast will have some gameplay thrown in. I usually don't add footage to my podcasts, but I think given the system and the relative lack of exposure of some of these games, I think it's worth having an option for you guys to see what we're talking about. It's not going to be completely edited or anything. You know, there'll be times where there's nothing on screen at all other than just the logo, but I just wanted to make you aware that that will be an option. But whether you watch or not, thanks for listening, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Port Podcast. This is a multi-tap episode where we cover a specific topic when inviting somebody onto the show. And today's topic is going to be about the NEC PC-FX, which is a console that was released exclusively in Japan in 1994 by NEC. It's generally thought of as the failed follow-up to the TurboGrafx or PC Engine console that NEC also put out. And if you've heard about the PC-FX before, there's a good chance that you've heard the Western narrative around the platform, which is that it's a platform full of skeevy content. And while there's some truth to that, that's really an oversimplification and an exaggeration as well. So to talk about these topics today and the general software library of the PC-FX, I brought on Matt.
Hi. Yeah, so I also go by Playongo or Filler. I am a video game collector and just general fan. I've had a YouTube channel for close to a decade now under Playongo. I also have a YouTube channel for my Filler fan translation work. I've fan translated games for close to 20 years now. I have dozens of game scripts and released English language fan translation patches. And I'm a big PC-FX fan. So thank you very much for having me on.
And with your fan translations, do you have a couple of high profile ones that you can think of off the top of your head that you've worked on?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with dynamic designs. So one of the first ones we did was the Slayers RPG on the Super Famicom. I translated half of the script for GOD, Growth or Devolution. So that's a pretty cool RPG. The Aretha series, we have actually just released Aretha 1 and 2 in the past few years. Aretha 2 came out pretty recently. So those are some more high-profile games.
Well, nice. I want to thank you for your service as a fan translator.
My pleasure.
It's super helpful for someone like me who barely has any Japanese knowledge.
And I of course, have fan translated a PC-FX game. We'll talk about that a little bit more.
You now have a new award you can put on your desk. You're the first American podcaster on my podcast who currently lives in America.
Oh, wow.
I think everybody has either been from the UK, Australia, or lives in Japan. So congratulations. No one can take that away from you.
Well, that's great. You have a very international podcast.
Yeah. But despite the Americanness of today's podcast, it is definitely about Japanese games here. So first and foremost, the PC-FX is not a console you would typically run into like you would any other console when you're, living in America. I kind of want to get an idea of how you came across the console and kind of what your history is with it.
I was first introduced to it back around 1995, 1996. I think my buddy ended up importing it from Japan. I think it was in 1996. The system had probably been out for a year and a half at that point. We were just getting into anime. As a thing, right? They're just recognizing there's this Japanese animation. And I think that's kind of what prompted him to import the system. And so I got to play it back when it was contemporary. So that was very fun.
And it's a system that is very, maybe very anime is the best way to put it.
Yes.
So how I came across the platform was about 10 years ago for me. I was looking into PlayStation 1 importing, and I ended up picking up Blue Breaker Burst 2, from what at the time was Rising Stuff, but is now Japan Retro Direct, which our good friend Vink runs. In playing Blue Breaker Burst 2, I weirdly enough enjoyed it, and despite it being a Japanese fighting game that was very story heavy, and I did some research on it because I was interested in making a video about it, and then I found out about Blue Breaker for the PC-FX, which then kind of led me down the path of what is this system? And eventually got me to go ahead and import it was I was interested in a game called Team Innocent, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So to start off talking about the PC-FX, I just kind of want to talk about a little bit about the hardware and kind of what the system was trying to do. Like I said earlier, it is kind of a follow-up to the PC Engine in some way, but it's also, NEC was also doing PCs at the time with the PC-98, and those were somewhat commonly used as game machines, and the audience for those kind of geared a bit older. But also, at this time was around the time CD media was kind of still becoming a big thing, like the early 90s, basically. And so you have a lot of games that are basically trying to make use of that extra space with things like streaming audio from the disc, full motion video, and voice acting.
Yeah, no, those things were very new at the time, and I think it's, when you're looking at the PC-FX, it's important to remember that those things were pretty novel. A lot of those PC-98 games were probably coming out on floppy disks, right? So if there was, for instance, a port to the PC-FX and it had voice acting, that alone was pretty amazing. And it's certainly not that you couldn't do that on a PC. I don't know what the adoption of CD-ROM drives for those PC systems were and things like that, but there's certainly an appeal to the PC-FX as a kind of a window into PC gaming of that time to a certain extent. And I would also say to really just kind of otaku culture, kind of nerd culture at the time.
And in terms of the type of content on the system, I think in a lot of ways you could also look at the PC Engine CD stuff. I feel like you see a lot of overlap between the types of games that was appearing on the PC Engine CD, as well as the PC-FX. So in some ways, it almost feels like this weird convergence between the PC Engine CD and what was happening on PC-98 and things like that. And I think it's kind of interesting combination in that way.
Without a doubt, yeah, absolutely. And for me too, I think there was a time when I felt like 2D gaming was the future, right? It was what I was looking forward to. And I think we see now too, I feel at least a little bit vindicated that 2D gaming hasn't gone away. It's still it's still fun, and I especially feel like those 2D games from back then actually hold up quite a bit better than some of the early 3D games, for instance, right?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because one way I kind of think of the PC-FX and kind of when it came out and what the system capabilities were around that time is I actually think a lot of it like the Dreamcast. There's a sliver of time where it was kind of impressive for what it is. It's better than a Sega CD. It's better than a TurboGrafx CD. But, a year and a half to 2 years later, you have the PlayStation 1 and Saturn coming out. And they generally, I'm not particularly aware of anything the PC-FX does better than those systems per se. One thing I also think that's kind of interesting about PC-FX is you do have these digital magazines and stuff on the platform you can buy. A lot of games will have voice actor, I don't know if interview is the right word. I believe it's Chip Chan Kick. You could go into a section and the voice actor will just sit there and talk to you for a little bit, basically.
I don't know if this is related, but I was poking around on Twitter a little bit. And something interesting that I was introduced to is the idea, just a Japanese speaker talking about the system, is that they perceived it as a system for enthusiasts, right? Mm-hmm. So it was an expensive system. And it's funny, it was probably, I don't remember what the retail price was, but it was probably more expensive than the PlayStation. So on some level, their perception of the system was a system for hardcore anime nerds, right? So I think of it a little bit like the Neo Geo here, right? The Neo Geo, I only ever saw it in a video game store once, set up. I didn't know anyone who had it. It was expensive, but it was super cool. If you saw it, you were like, oh, this has its own, it's basically these arcade games that you could play on a home system. And, the PC-FX, it's okay, it's this kind of souped up PC-98, anime nerd system, but basically something for enthusiasts, kind of a little bit of a high-end thing that you might spend extra money on if you're really into for instance voice actors and actresses, the same people who really get get super into like anime and anime production. Even with its launch games, it does seem like kind of a very anime otaku focused lineup of software.
Before we, get too deep into the library, I think first and foremost, we have to kind of talk a little bit about the general perception of the library. It's a system that I frequently just hear get called basically as a erotic game machines in some way. Everyone says it will be like their hentai games that are on there, and that's what the library is full of. And that's pretty far from the truth. So the platform, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on these numbers, there's about 3 18-plus games as far as I know, correct? There's Pia Carrot, Can Can Bunny, Dokusei 2. Are those the only 3?
Those are the only 3. If you're saying that the system is full of like sexually explicit, video games, you're talking about literally 3 games. Now the library is fairly small. It's like 62, 63 titles, something like that. So, as a percentage, 3 games is not insignificant, but it's a little silly, I think, to, judge a system by 3 of the games that came out on it. I believe that they are all PC ports as well. So none of these 18 only games that were released on the system are actually developed exclusively for the PC-FX. There are three PC ports that are 18 only. There are also 4 other games that are basically mature audiences. The way they say it is recommended for over the age of 18, but it's not restricted. The sales weren't restricted. They could sell it to whomever they chose. You have First Kiss Story, Dragon Knight 4, Super Real Mahjong FX PV, which I think is also the 5th in the series. They go like P1, P2. And then Tokimeki Card Paradise.
And I can't speak to the other games in that 18 plus recommended, but basically for First Kiss Story specifically, generally the type of content you see in that game are girls in their underwear at some point. There is an opening cutscene with a girl stepping out the shower, but it covers up basically any of the naughty bits. And then also there's some mature themes here and there. There is a slight scene towards the end of one of the characters that kind of involves molestation, but it's generally clean overall. It's not like pornographic content.
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting, like when you compare this to similar things over here, like for instance the the God of War games, right? They have this sort of mini game in them and things like that. You have stuff like the Mass Effect series, has and Dragon Age and things like that. I think they're very lauded actually for their depictions of romance in the games, right? And I think that's kind of where this divide comes in some ways, is that I think people are a little more willing to look at a game like The Witcher 3 or something like that and kind of accept the fact that it's a whole game with all kinds of things to do that also has these romance elements that are significant to the game. And I want to say too, like when it comes to taboo things, I feel like and this applies to everyone too, it goes both ways, where I think it's easy to kind of project our own taboo, subjects onto another culture, onto another country, and go, oh, like it's so taboo here, but it's okay over there, right? And I see this in reverse. And, so I feel like, unfortunately, for whatever reason, the PC-FX, I think, is caught up a little bit in that perception of that, oh, it's like, it's that place where the taboo things aren't taboo, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually really not true, right? It's like these other places, they actually have pretty strong taboos about a lot of these things too. But I think it's actually nice if media can delve into some of these things. And I think it's nice too if we can recognize that, a lot of these games really are just they're dealing with the same themes and the same the same subject matter in a lot of the same ways on both sides of the ocean, right? It's just that one game is called First Kiss Story and the other game is called The Witcher 3 or something like that. But
and I think also like even the games that are in these kind of styles today that come out today, they generally don't have as much of a bad perception. But I think a lot of it comes down to the perception that was made 10, 15 years ago about the PC-FX sticks because there's not a lot of people trying to reevaluate the perception of the system, I guess.
Absolutely.
So even though if you go back and look at the content today, it's like, actually, we have a lot of games that do these similar things today on Steam and stuff like that. The narrative of what this platform is sticks around because people aren't doing the in-depth looking on that system. So
yeah, and I don't know what it is, but it's kind of like, if once you kind of have a framework, like a frame for looking at something, unless you have a really good incentive to reframe how you're looking at something, I think it's easy and convenient to just kind of maintain that framework.
Yeah. And only one more thing I really want to touch on before we get started on talking about individual games is, even though there's the 18 plus and there's the 18 recommended games, there is generally, like, I guess you would call it like the anime fan service kind of nature around a lot of these games.
Absolutely. It's very, very, very otaku culture, very Akiba culture is, I think the game library is seeped in that.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think you can pick up a non-18 plus game and still get something that's like, oh, this is a little sexual. But it's not something that I think it's pretty much comparable to what you would see in any anime today.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt.
So to go ahead and start talking about particular titles, the first thing I want to kind of lead off with is talk about the launch game. So there's 3 launch games. There was Team Innocent, a game called Battle Heat, and Graduation to Neo Generation. And to start with, I think Team Innocent is probably one of the most appealing games to look at initially because you can kind of recognize what it is. It's a survival horror game about a year before Resident Evil came out. And, the general narrative that Resident Evil definitely popularized survival horror, but there's plenty of games doing a similar style before Resident Evil. And Team Innocent falls into those. And it's kind of interesting because the system has like an anime background. It gives this survival horror game like a very lighthearted nature that's not like the B movie action kind of nature. It's a lot of very fun character interactions between these characters that are trapped. Well, one character's trapped on the spaceship and the other 2 are like flying above safely from their ship, just commenting.
It's very interesting. And, I'm struck when I'm playing the game how much it feels like Resident Evil and Team Innocent are both kind of drawing from the same well. It's very much that kind of tank control, fixed camera angles, walking through an environment that's definitely creepy, because there are 3 scenarios in the game, but you're, like you say, you're alone with only, people to talk to on the radio. And it's very solitary, and they definitely do a lot with, I think, the sound, and like even when you first start the game, like this girder falls from the ceiling, right, and like makes this huge clang, and it sets this tone of like, okay, like it, we're trying to unsettle you, which I think is great.
But it's interesting clash because as soon as your like your like communications turns on, you have this super peppy anime girl that like jumping around and commenting on what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's jiggle animations and there's a shower scene. I don't know if you ran across that and things like that. Yeah, so it is. There's kind of definitely a clash in tone, I think, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Team Innocent is a game with a pretty unique look when it comes to survival horror. One thing that you might be able to correct me on, the PC-FX, as far as I know, is a platform that really couldn't do 3D, or at least not do it well.
There are games that defy that, but it is accurate. The main thing is, I think what we were seeing at the time is 3D hardware acceleration, right? So you were buying cards to put into your PC that had hardware specifically for 3D, and you saw things like, in the Saturn, they crammed stuff in there. The PlayStation really, had that stuff built in. The PC-FX just didn't. So you do see some software, some software 3D effects, and they're pretty good. But it's not a 3D system by any means. And so, I mean, what's cool about Team Innocent is it has the pre-rendered backgrounds that you had in Resident Evil, but you have these 2D sprites, and they use sprite scaling. It's simplistic sprite scaling. It's kind of the same sort of sprite scaling you would see when they would try to do the like Sega's super scalar arcade games or something on the Genesis or the Mega Drive. It's just like they store 5 or 6 different size sprites, and then they just load them as you move forward and back on the screen. But it's like there is action in the game. You can kick things, you can shoot things, you find items and things like that. It works surprisingly well, I would say.
It plays well. I would say not very challenging. Like there's no real intensity to the encounters or anything like that, because you can deal with people so quickly. You can just punch them to death and they don't really react.
Right.
There is gameplay there. There's a lot of options in the gameplay, and it's kind of weird. The controller is like a 6-button controller, but you have to like switch what one of the buttons does all the time. So it's like this button can kick, this button can shoot, this button can jump, but you have to assign it to one button.
That's a really good point. Yeah, so sort of like that. I don't know, just the awkward, controls that you tend to get on games from that time in particular too.
Yeah. But I'd say it's a game, and I actually made a video about this game a while ago, and I think it's a game that's very easy to play. It's a very visual game in a lot of ways. There's like every cutscene has some kind of animated portrait, voice acting with it. If you pick up items, there's usually a graphic associated with it. And, it being on a space station, they put some English on there so you can figure out what rooms are the main computer room and stuff like that. So I think it's like a very accessible game to try.
What we'll probably talk about on these games, across the board is the presentation is very good, I think, for most games on the PC-FX. So, as a launch game, like, I don't know that this really hits you over the head with like, oh wow, this is how a next gen game can look for this new PC-FX console, but it does. I do feel like it is very pleasing. They do have the FMV at the start. The portraits are kind of well animated. The voice acting is really good, and the music too. I can't really overstate that. I'm I guess I'm a casual fan of Kenji Kawai. He's done most of the anime and video game soundtracks that I really love. Did the music for Vampire Princess Miyu, did the soundtrack for Ghost in the Shell. He's done video game work. His soundtrack is on Deep Fear for the Sega Saturn. Yep. So he did the music for Team Innocent, and actually I really love it. I think that soundtrack is just it's one of my favorite video game soundtracks. I think it's really, really well done.
One of the other launch games was Battle Heat, and this is an interesting fighter on the system because it's a one-on-one fighter, but it doesn't use character sprites for the battle animations or how you're playing it. You don't directly control characters as they move back and forth on the screen. Instead, it plays a series of FMVs, and as you put in fighting inputs, as you punch, as you kick, as you use very Street Fighter like commands to do special attacks, it will play a FMV to represent that. It's one of those games that when you look at it, you don't really know what's happening. Like if you're not actually playing it, I feel like just kind of looks like a mess. But once you sit down and start playing it, it actually feels weirdly like a fighting game because you are putting those inputs in. And basically, as the other player receiving those inputs, you have a chance to counter them and things like that. So you can kind of counter back and forth the other player's input. And there is like a spacing element to the game too. There's like you can move back and then you use projectiles which are in the back, or you can move forward and then you're up closer. And some specials only work in some positioning if you're closer or further away from an enemy. It's a weird thing. It shouldn't play like a fighting game, but somehow it does. The thing I thought was most impressive about this game was how quickly it switches between a lot of the FMV sequences. I, again, am not super technically minded about this stuff, but it's a very snappy game. I feel like when I see video in games, I typically expect that it's like, actively loading off the disc. I assume they're storing the video somewhere else.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And unfortunately, this might be one of the games that plays to the PC-FX's strengths the most. But because I was going to say you probably couldn't do a game like this on other systems because of that. I'm trying to think, because I think the FMV games, that are on other systems tend to be stuff like, Time Gal and, that's sort of your typical like Dragon's Lair style game, like something you'd see on the Laser Active or something. I think these 2D fighting games are a bit unique to the PC-FX, and also you did see this kind of cinematic style fighting game on some of the 8 and 16-bit systems too. So you did see them actually on the Super Famicom and even stuff like the Game Gear or things like that as well.
But those are just like using sprites and things like that. It's not
exactly.
Yeah, because like I think when I think of Time Gal, I think of like you put the input in and then the video freezes for a second and then it actually shows you what happens. I could be wrong about that, but
yeah, exactly. No, I think you're right. Yeah, you really don't see that on something like Battle Heat.
If you like Hokuto no Ken or Fist of the North Star or something like that, aesthetically it's very similar to that. Great soundtrack too, great opening video as well. So the last launch lineup game is Graduation 2 Neo Generation, and neither of us have played this, but I think it is worth mentioning because in the launch lineup of things, I think it does kind of show where the system was going. You had a game that was like very much game-like, but focused on presentation. You had a game like Battle Heat, which is very FMV focused. And then you have Graduation 2, which is this like stat-based life simulator where, as far as I can understand, again, have not played it, is you kind of adjust the stats for these girls that are going to school. There's like 5 girls. And then they basically try to do different events in school, like, athletic meet kind of stuff, and then and doing tests and things like that. And how they succeed kind of depends on what their stats are. And then as you do that, that kind of affects their development. And then you get awarded with some CG like from time to time of like the girl in like an outfit or something like that. And I feel like this kind of completes between these 3 games, this kind of completes the general library of what you expect on the PC-FX going forward at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think minus, sort of like a more deep RPG or sort of,
True.
Tactical RPG kind of experience. Yeah, it's a pretty good representation of the styles and the technical capabilities of the system.
A title like Graduation 2, I think, can roll us into other games on the system, like Megami Tengoku 2, where you're also kind of building a character.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Megami Tengoku 2 is really fun, and it is what I would call a simulation. And I feel like when people talk about open world games and things like that, I mean, that's like in some ways they're similar. You're trying to get the feeling of this open space where you can explore and do whatever you want, and it has its own, maybe it has a day night cycle or something. That's very much the way Megami Tengoku is. You're playing as a goddess, right? So it's this is a goddess paradise, and you're competing with these sort of quote unquote evil goddesses for followers. Okay, so essentially you're just like you're trying to get more devoted worshippers.
It kind of seemed like you were being kind of an idol to some extent from what you showed me.
Yeah, exactly. I think it very much is, because really the mechanics for doing that are pretty ridiculous, because they're like dressing up in different outfits and like striking poses at different places throughout the city. And you also, you can engage in battles against the sort of quote unquote evil goddesses. It's definitely not an RPG battle so much. It's basically you can either knock other followers away from the opponent, or you can take their followers and add to your own, so you're basically trying to reduce their followers to 0 through like a variety of moves that each character has and things like that. But it's a really charming game, and there's a lot of stuff you can do in terms of going around to different environments. There are like little events that you can trigger. There are a lot of items that you can get, and there are like stats that you manage without a doubt. So like your hunger, your health, your fatigue.
It's like a mix of physical and mental health, from what I can tell. Like, because there's like stress level management and things like that too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. That type of simulation game. I don't know that we like really talk about that a lot in in Western game types. I don't know that we see a whole lot of those.
I feel like with the case of, and maybe this is part of what makes the PC-FX a little hard for some people to get into. I feel like with Japanese PC games at this time, you had a lot of weird mechanics around relationships. In this game, making sure your character's not too fat. You got to be skinny enough. You also don't want to be too skinny and things like that. You do have this background of like these more extensive managing a character, and like there's a lot more nuance to how you're progressing through a game that's not just, going from point A to point B. Oh, I need to get stronger strength so I can hit things harder kind of thing.
So when we think about stat management, I think it really comes from Dungeons and Dragons. That I think really set the tone for you've got dexterity and strength and wisdom and intelligence and things like that. So, when you're managing stats like, how hungry or stressed out you are and how many, followers you have and that sort of stuff, it's definitely like, it doesn't really fit that model of sort of, coming from tabletop gaming. So, and exactly where these things come from, I'm not entirely sure. I know that Princess Maker was one of the early, raising sim style games. And it's entirely possible that just a game like that ends up setting a tone for so many games that follow it. That, some of these games may, they really may be borrowing elements, that were established in a game like Princess Maker and just expanding on those.
I know this might be harder because you have a more intermediate knowledge of Japanese, but would you say this is a game that is approachable without really knowing the language?
That's a good question. It's been a while since I've played the game. I mean, I think like if you've watched my video on YouTube about Megami Tengoku 2, like certainly I feel like you could, especially if you're able to, let's say, look up what some of the items are and things like that, item names in shops and that sort of thing. It does have enough of just like a general gameplay loop that I don't think requires you to understand what dialogue is being said. That absolutely, I think you could have some fun with Megami Tengoku 2. I do think some of the charm is just, the goofy dialogue and things like that, and the character moments and that kind of thing. So you definitely miss out on a little bit of that. But it's certainly something that I think a non-Japanese speaker could at least approach and get some enjoyment from.
So another game that you've spent some time with that I unfortunately haven't even gotten around to getting a copy of yet is Firewoman Matoi-gumi. And this seems like it's kind of like an RPG with some, I would say, school relationship mechanics kind of to it.
It definitely has more RPG-like elements to it, I think, than something like Megami Tengoku 2, but it's still a bit of a simulation. Like, you have this big school campus. You're in high school. You, of course, transfer to this high school. And basically, in just the culture of the school, you have this group, this gang of ladies who, they're kind of the bossy, police women. They make sure that like the bad guys aren't getting out of line and stuff like that. And you have basically a turn-based battle system. So one of the main mechanics in the game is to go around to like classes or different school clubs, and you're going to learn moves, and then you can assign those moves to your gamepad, literally just to a button, and you basically queue them up into like a series, like a combo, basically, that then you execute. And you're basically just trying to queue up attacks into a combo when you're fighting.
I believe I saw there's like dating mechanics in this game to some extent, or at least there's like some interaction with certain girl characters.
There is, absolutely. And so when you have games like the 18 only games that we talked about, things like that, those are specifically maybe dating sims where that's their main focus. But then you do have other games on the system, such as Firewoman Matoi-gumi, where a dating element is part of the gameplay. It's maybe not the whole thing, but yeah, it's kind of a major part of it. It's not especially deep, so you're not going to get a lot of really, you're not going to get like any sort of emotional stories or anything, I don't think. But as part of this life simulation, it is kind of fun. You're trying to basically figure out where to meet and see these different characters. You're trying to manipulate, to kind of a stats way, like how much they like you, and you can keep track of a whole number of different characters, and you can unlock little events with them and things like that. And you're trying to get to the end of the game and basically confess your love to one of the girls.
One of the other games that kind of does this to some extent is Blue Breaker, which is kind of like more of a fantasy RPG kind of thing, but you do have like different character relationships in your party and things like that.
Blue Breaker, it's really interesting. I really liked what I played of it, but it is definitely a bit confusing and it's tremendously unique. So again, if we're taking this, let's say a dating element to one of these games, this is an RPG. Like you say, in that fantasy RPG style, and you're playing a young prince or something like that. And so the game starts off, your dad is like, look, you need to go and defeat the devil king, right? And while you're at it, get yourself a wife. Here's so and so. She's like, you've got your childhood friend character or something who's in your party. And so it's very odd. Like I didn't understand it at first, and over time I kind of started to realize that you have to treat the characters in your party like as if they were the characters in a dating sim game. So what you're trying to do is like you're trying to please them. You're trying not to upset them. You're trying to figure out kind of who they are and what makes them tick. So when that comes to an RPG party, it's literally things like, you're trying to make sure that you're not letting them die in battle, that you're not letting their HP get too low, that you're, just the things in that sense. And also like you form parties. So, you go back to your inn or something like that. You've bumped into a new character. You've got some other girl, like you go out, you put her into your party, and the other girl's like, hey, I'm not going to join your party today. I've got better things to do, and so it's really unique in that respect. So I haven't gone back and played more of it, but it's very interesting. They have ported some of these games to other systems, unfortunately, because the PC-FX wasn't, especially successful. But I feel like it's kind of the thing you would only see on the PC-FX to a certain extent.
Yeah, I do think it's really fascinating that the relationship parts really come down to things you're doing in the game too, and not just which dialogue box did you pick kind of thing. I always value that kind of experience of like, how do we wrap all this into the game part of this game? How do we make sure we're using the interactive part of this game to the fullest extent? Which might be kind of annoying from a from a trying to complete the game perspective if a character's dying. But I think it's a novel way to present that at the very least. In terms of the battle system, if I recall correctly, from what little I have played of it, I did buy a copy a while ago. I just haven't actually invested a ton of time into it. The battle system's kind of automated to some extent. It's very MMO-like, where the characters just kind of automatically attack. The reason why I think this is kind of interesting is, and I just realized we talked about 4 Hunex games in a row.
Okay, yeah.
I have a particular interest in the developer Hunex for various reasons that started with Blue Breaker Burst 2, but they kind of did this thing at the time. They're making all these like self-playing RPGs.
Yep.
And one of the games also is Sparkling Feather, which is a strategy RPG. So you have a bunch of characters that are around the map, like in a very Final Fantasy Tactics kind of way. As far as I can tell, you kind of just tell characters what you kind of want them to do, and it doesn't necessarily mean they'll do it the way that you'll ask them to. Sometimes they'll go off and take a different path than kind of what way you were hoping they were doing. Sometimes they'll run up to an enemy and use like their ranged attack, like point blank, rather than their normal attack. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that I don't know the language enough to really know for certain if I'm just missing something.
I was just going to say, I think that you're correct in that. Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like, I know when I played it, something rubbed me the wrong way about the combat, and that was definitely it, because I think I was playing it off the heels of something that was very tactical, and so you were really thinking through all the battles. And in this, it's not about thinking, it's about about your relationship with the characters in terms of how much they trust you and how much they'll follow your orders. It reminds me a little bit of, there are other games like that. I think maybe it's a little more common in some Japanese games, like Slayers on the Super Nintendo, on the Super Famicom, had a very similar thing where like you're playing Lita inverse, and you can tell Naga to cast a spell, and she's just going to do whatever she wants because it's Naga.
It is interesting. Like, I can appreciate the concept behind it. I think the one hard thing about it, though, is that the relationship stuff in that game is kind of semi-random. At the end of every mission, you get a slot machine, and that slot machine determines how many characters you have a chance to build a relationship at once with, and it also determines whether you can choose who you want to build a relationship with, or if it's random. But it feels unnecessary, like an unnecessary piece of annoyance that they kind of put in place. We talked about all these games having a really great presentation generally, and Sparkling Feather looks good, but presentation just doesn't feel like it's there. There's like 30-second audio loops for songs, and you're like, these missions take like 30 minutes, so it's pretty bad. The animation's super choppy and everything. I wanted to love this game, but I actually really like it. So let me say something good about it. It has a really diverse cast of characters, and a lot of these PC-FX games, it's kind of like there's the cute girls or there's the cute boys, and you don't really see them mingle as much, or at least and not in terms of how important they are. And I feel like with Sparkling Feather, it's a good mix of characters that are all kind of shoved together in this one story. Like, even though there's dating mechanics, it doesn't feel like it's particularly trying to get you to prioritizing certain characters over other characters, I guess. So the next thing I want to do is kind of shift the conversation. One thing I wanted to kind of talk a bit about were games that were particularly accessible, games you can kind of pick up and play without too much trouble. I wouldn't say there's a ton of these on the system, but the ones that are there, I think are generally pretty good. Starting with maybe, do you know the full name for this? Kishin Zenki?
Yeah, Kishin Doji Zenki FX. Vajra Fight.
Yeah, it's a long one in terms of name.
Yeah, it is. I've actually been involved in a couple translation projects for games based on the Kishin Doji Zenki manga and anime, and so we have translated it as Demon Child Zenki before, for what that's worth.
This is, I believe, the most expensive game on the PC-FX, if I'm not wrong, and I think you'll find that general trend of if a game is accessible on the PC-FX, it is typically very expensive.
Definitely. Yep.
And I think this game, it's a very short game. I think it's about an hour long. I almost consider it like a roller coaster ride of a game. Like, once it gets going, it kind of never stops. It's just this fast-paced, beat-em-up kind of game with a ton of voice acting in it as you're going through these environments and just a lot happening on screen.
Yeah, definitely. And it's almost too bad that, I don't know, when people talk about, like, the, best beat 'em up games and things like that, and maybe they talk about Aliens versus Predator or something like that, the arcade game, or Streets of Rage or something. I guess I don't know if mechanically this game holds up, but certainly presentation wise. And I've played through the full game. One thing that's very nice is it's only two characters, but the two characters play very differently, Zenki and Chiaki. They do have mechanics taken directly from the anime, where Chiaki is she has this bracelet, which is has kind of sealed the power of this demon, and so she's able to unlock the power of the demon. So that that's something where you'll see Zenki will transform into his full Zenki form, and otherwise he's actually kind of nerfed into this child form, so that that he can be controlled and not take over the world or something. But Chiaki plays differently too. She can shoot these kind of energy bolts and things like that. And I definitely agree. I've played this 2-player with my buddy too, and just to be able to play like a really stylish, really nice looking, very anime, there's almost this boss rush quality to it, where it's set piece after set piece, boss after boss, and like you said, if it's an hour long, it's an exciting hour of playing a pretty fun beat 'em up game.
And it does, I wouldn't say it has a ton of depth, and I think I agree with you that maybe it doesn't play as well as other fighting game or other beat 'em ups. It feels a little loose at times, but there are like Street Fighter style inputs you can do to do special skills with each of the characters for different types of kicks and things like that. For the length of the game, I don't think it's really worth learning.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things is that the PC-FX on its controller has these little switches to switch between mode A and mode B, and I forget what switch you have to do for it, but you can essentially turn the mode on so all the specials are mapped to the upper keys on the gamepad, so you can just use your specials whenever you want. And maybe it's a little broken, but I think that's a fun way to play the game.
Yeah, definitely, especially from an accessibility standpoint, even if it's just a language thing, if you can't read the manual to figure out what move is what button combo input, that's definitely a great option.
In some ways, kind of how the voice acting is overlaid with this game reminds me a little bit of like kind of how Star Fox kind of got with Star Fox 64, where it's just like a nice background noise almost to you playing the game, and kind of how the dialogue evolves while you're playing, I feel like kind of informs the tone of like the battle scene and things like that. And I always like that a lot about like the Star Fox series of when they use dialogue to complement the action that's on screen.
Definitely. I mean, you do feel like you're playing through like a scenario that's unfolding, right? It's like you're playing through a story mode, and so there's always the main characters are talking, or the enemy characters are talking, and it flows pretty seamlessly too. It doesn't get interrupted, for instance, by full motion video cutscenes, which are definitely something that is a strong aspect of the system, but it's very much just in game as part of the gameplay.
So another game that I personally haven't played is, I think it's Choshin Heiki
Zeroigar.
Gotcha. And I think this game, from what I've seen, feels a lot like Kishin Zenki, but in like shoot 'em up form.
That's not a bad description. So this game, one thing that I really like about it, of course, is that there is a fan translation for it. So some guys that hang out, well, they used to hang out around the PC Engine FX forums, but they went away. They still hang around on the PC Engine Software Bibles forums. Sam I Am and Elmer did a really great fan translation of this. So if you guys are interested in, what the actual story is, all of the full motion video scenes are, subtitled and things like that. They really did a fantastic job with it. But yeah, it's also like a very stylish, again, very anime, very high presentation sort of shoot 'em up. But I think one of the things that's interesting about this, I struggle with it a little bit. I like vertical shoot 'em ups, but if you play it, the ship movement is very fast. I believe there are speed power-ups. You don't want to get going too fast. I kind of forget it, but there might not be. But your ship is just fast in general, and I find it a little hard to play. But there's some very interesting mechanics around it, because you do level up. So what you'll find is you'll play the game, you'll hit a boss that's hard, you'll die, but what actually happens is you're accruing experience. So you try it again, you get more experience, you level up, you get stronger, and then you actually have like an easier time fighting the boss next time. Which I think is kind of a unique shoot 'em up game mechanic. I don't think I've really seen that kind of thing in a shoot 'em up before.
The presentation of the game, does that feel like it's really using the full like PC-FX hardware for that, or does it feel pretty much in line with what was going on with like PlayStation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think in terms of like getting a sense of depth, or having like an impressive amount of sprites on the screen or something like that, I think it feels pretty much in line with games on other hardware. Certainly there are a lot of sprites on the screen. The graphics do look very nice. Everything is smooth and fast. But again, I think the strength kind of ends up being in it has the story mode. Not as seamless as Zenki. It's more, you get a full motion video cutscene, and then it goes into a battle. But it very much seems like a very cinematic experience, I think, is what I'm going for. Again, good voice acting and things like that. So I think in that respect, it feels like a PC-FX game without a doubt. And, I think it's quite good for what it is.
So pricing-wise on this one, I'd imagine it's desirable for shooter fans, and it's also an accessible PC-FX game. I assume it's expensive?
Yes, it is. Fortunately, I am a bit out of the pricing loop. So incidentally, I do have a complete PC-FX collection. Mm-hmm. I basically decided to go after a complete collection. At this point, it was probably 6-7 years ago, maybe something like that. I decided to finish my collection off. And so at that time, and it depends, you really have to look up what things sell for, not just what people are asking for. But this was an expensive game back then. I think I spent maybe like $150 on it, at least $100 bucks. It's in that range. It's not, you're not going to pick this up for $20.
So the last kind of game I wanted to highlight in terms of like the accessible, I'd say accessible trilogy for the system almost, is Chip Chan Kick. And I think maybe the simplest way to explain this game is it's a Bubble Bobble clone. In some ways, basically you're these girls that run around and they have these almost Puyo Puyo looking balls with eyes on them, and you throw them at enemies, and then that stuns them, then you kick them, and then they fall down the stage. And as they fall on the stage, they'll combo and kill other enemies. And depending on what your combo is, you get like different fruits and snacks. And when you eat those, you get like bonus points and things like that.
It's very much like a kind of a single screen, sort of throwback arcade game to Bubble Bobble, Rainbow Islands, like that kind of thing. Even the original Mario Brothers, not Super Mario Brothers, but the original Mario Brothers was that kind of a single screen arcade platformer game. Yeah, it's like you just played that game. Like, what did you think of it? Because I think it's a ton of fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's very simple, but it's like there's a lot of strategy to it on like, I want to get to the top of the stage so I can combo everything, but I'm going to die 5 times trying to get to the top because I think it's actually pretty difficult to read enemies at times. They kind of act almost erratically to some extent, where they'll just suddenly turn and walk towards you really quickly. So it's like you're watching for the pattern, and then you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. You jump up there, and they immediately just touch you, and you just die.
And I hadn't really played Bubble Bobble before I played Chip-Chon Kicks, so playing it, I was kind of surprised by the boss battles, but I found them to be super fun. I mean, I guess minus the last boss, I was actually pretty impressed. I watched you beat it, and I'm like, man, like that took me a lot of. Although actually, didn't you do some little cheat or something though? I think.
Yeah. Pro tip: buy a second controller, and then spawn player 2. You get more lives.
Okay. Yeah. No, I did not know that trick, so I probably had to play that like a dozen times to get by it. But yeah, no, it's very fun because it's I think the length is good. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it's an arcade game. I've developed a much stronger appreciation for arcade games and arcade game experiences. I feel like as I've gotten older, man, I love that I can sit down, for an hour, even a half hour, or like, whatever, and play one of these games. And Chip-Chon Kick, like, it has some length to it. Like, I feel like, I don't think I could get through that game. It's certainly not the first time I played through it. I wouldn't think I would get through it in less than like an hour and a half or something. I don't remember. Do you remember how long?
It took me like 2 hours. So a lot of like even Kishin Zenki does this. There's like a hard mode.
Yep.
I have not tried that with Chip-Chan Cake, but at least with Kishin Zenki, if you do hard mode, you get like a special credit sequence at the end that's different from the normal credits. I have not seen if that's the case for Chip-Chan Kick, but I feel like it should be there if it's not.
Yeah. This
game does have some cutscenes in between too. So there's like little interactions. There's like basically 5 different bosses, I think, that are kind of go off to different areas in the environment they're in. It's basically like these evil, I don't know if evil's the right word, but little overlords that go to different parts of town. They're in the city, they're in a carnival, they're at I think one's just like a restaurant kind of thing or some kind of food court area. And so there's just like a lot of little fun backgrounds and stuff. It's just a cute experience overall, cute characters, a lot of voice acting, things like that.
Yeah. Everything's very adorable. It's like even it's sort of like the quote unquote evil enemies. It's like they all, they cry when they lose, and they, everything's very cutesy. It's fun. Like I like this aesthetic's a lot of fun.
And the bosses are also very almost like shooterish in some ways. They have like kind of that spread shot attack pattern kind of thing. They do like different types of bullet types that they have, and it's a lot of like pattern recognition and knowing how to avoid those. Because your characters don't move particularly fast without the right power-ups. So you have to be very aware of like how a boss is going to shoot and what you can do to avoid those attacks.
Absolutely, yeah. If an enemy is going to do some attack that's going to, take the whole bottom of the screen or something like that, you definitely have to know that you want to be at the top of the screen, or it's going to come down the middle. You're going to need to be on the sides or something. That's a big aspect of this boss battle.
One thing I really like about Chip-Chan Kick's presentation is that it actually does a lot of like sprite-based cutscenes. So this is like more particular what you would see on a lot of like CD-based systems, because they couldn't do like, full screen, full motion video or do a lot of full motion video. Instead, they do these like very detailed animated cutscenes kind of thing using actual sprites. At the time, having FMV stuff was great for PC-FX, but as the years go by, the compression of those old videos, it stands out, especially if you start like upscaling the console if you're not playing on like a CRT or something like that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And this game does, like, with those sprite-based animations, they just look really nice, super colorful. And they don't move as smoothly, but they're a real treat, I feel like. And I think like it's part of the reason why people like I don't know if you've seen that Twitter bot for PC98 or whatever, where they just repost screenshots from those games because it upscales so nicely.
Yeah, and yeah, so that aesthetic, a lot of those systems, like they had sometimes limited color palettes, right? You had to get to a certain, bit depth or something like that to just have every color in the world available to you. And so there was a time when just, you had that slightly limited kind of bitmap graphic kind of look to it. And there's a real aesthetic there that's actually very pleasing. And that I think, the PC-FX captures with a lot of games like Chip Chunky.
So what I want to talk about next are games you would think more of like as a visual novel or a dating sim or things like that. One in particular is particularly close to your heart, Matt. That's Welcome to Pia Carrot. I don't know anything about this other than I know Hunex worked on the port of this game, so I will let you take the stage here and make your sell for Pia Carrot.
I will make my case. So yeah, I mean, the story for this I think is pretty simple. You're a young man who loses a bet with his dad. You're not doing super well in school, and so you want to take this vacation. You're 18 years old, so you're kind of an adult. And you're like, well, my buddy and I booked this like cruise or something like that. They're going to go to like, by themselves, go have a good time. It's like summer, like spring break, basically. So your dad is like, you know what? I will pay for your spring break vacation if you don't fail any classes, right? So guess what? You fail your classes. And so what you agreed to do is to work at your dad's restaurant. And again, when we get into the simulation thing, Welcome to Pia Carrot is very much a dating simulation. So what you have sometimes now are things, when you say a visual novel, some of those games, they're really novel-like, right? They have a lot of text. They'll use text to set the scene. They'll have images, but like the images don't do all of the heavy lifting. They'll use a lot of prose and things like that. This is more like strictly dialogue, right? If you ever are setting the scene, you just have a different background image. The characters show up and represent themselves. And it's so you're going through a set number of days. This is your summer vacation. I think it's like a month and a half of working at this restaurant every day. You set your schedule. So you can determine like where you're working in the restaurant. Are you running the cash register? You're working in the back room, waiting tables, cooking, washing dishes, whatever. Of course, during the course of that, you have I don't even remember how many characters are in this, like 7, 8, 9, something like that. Of these girls that you can run into and interact with. And you have, of course, like the childhood friend, you have your character that you have a crush on. So it's nice because you have some backstory actually to a number of the characters. But there are, of course, new characters that you can meet through your interactions at the restaurant. It's a game that stuck with me because I was just always so curious about what it was that was going on in the game that I couldn't understand 99% of it, right? That, within, about 15 years, I had then translated the game, myself, and been able to actually even release that to the public, thanks very much to David Michael. One of the things that strikes me the most is there are these 2 reviews of this game on YouTube. For some reason, both from these English gentlemen, their reviews are very similar. They seem to both kind of have the same perceptions. I would almost kind of say it a misconception going into the game, that they're like, this is going to be a laugh. Like they're expecting like this is just going to be some dirty video game, and they're just kind of expecting to go in and either be shocked or just find something to poke fun at. And both of these guys are like, I really like this game. They're like, it's super compelling. Like I can't stop playing it. Like I'm really interested in, these characters. And I think we have stuff now, like, I don't know, Steins Gate or something like that. Like the story in that is amazing. Like this is nothing like that. But, David Michael basically had pointed out, he's like, I think I know, why you like this game so much, because there's always so much going on and there's so much that you're missing. right?
Yeah.
So at any one point, you're making decisions. You have to, like, you can go to a location, you can talk to a character, you know. So anytime you're doing something, there are just all these things that you're not able to do. And so, you know, the whole game takes you like maybe 2 hours to play through. But it's great because, you know, I found at least that I really wanted to go back in, play it again, you know, try to uncover the next character's route and things like that. And I know you mentioned about it before that you were keeping it a little bit at arm's length, maybe because of the cutscenes and things like that.
I had burned the game and had some issues.
Yes.
Trying to run it that way. It was not any problem with the content of the game. It was me just being like, I need to make this Team Innocent video. I don't have time to figure this out.
Right. So I wanted to put your fears to rest that this game does not rely heavily on FMV.
Mm-hmm.
It has an opening movie, it has a prologue movie, and it has an ending movie, and that's it.
I didn't get very far at all, but what I can say about the video is that I do think it's well implemented in the opening. It does that thing that a handful of PC-FX games do, where they like overlap the main character's dialogue in like in-game text on the video itself. And it does it after the game starts rather than just like the opening or ending cutscene, which maybe isn't a big deal. Baking in the subtitles to the actual video probably would not make any real difference. But it did leave a greater impression on me because of it, I think.
Yeah, that opening prologue is really cool, and it's kind of too bad. Like, by the time like Elmer got around to doing hacking on Zeroigar, mm-hmm. They had discovered, he had worked out a way to subtitle the videos and put them back in. You know, David, Michael, and I I wasn't really prioritizing that, but we hadn't really like gone as far as trying to subtitle those videos. So in that prologue, it's weird because you actually get like half of the conversation, which is kind of odd. But the other half of the conversation we actually have in like in the README file. If you download the patch for it, you can actually read what's going on. But yeah, so that prologue is actually the only time that it ever uses FMV like that. But it is actually a really cool effect. I do really like that FMV sequence where you know, it's video and then you have your main character talking and it types it out. It's very cool.
So I could be wrong, but I think this was originally a PC-98 game, right?
Correct.
I assume the reason you ended up doing the fan translation PC-FX version is just because the accessibility, that's what you had. Also, that's the version you had played too. Is that the main choice?
Yeah, it's the version that I played, but it's also thinking about these PC ports, especially on the PC-FX. You know, this Welcome to Pia Carrot edition is essentially the definitive edition of the game. You know, if you do want the version that has kind of, you know, more graphic scenes and things like that you would have gotten in the PC version, also has all the great voice acting, which is interesting. Like what you see a lot of times now are voice acting will be just the female characters or something like that. This actually, all the characters are voice acted. You know, it's your sister, your dad, the, you know, guys that you bump into.
Is the main character?
Except for the main character. You do have the silent protagonist, yeah.
So just to clarify, the Saturn version, that does not have the erotic scenes in it, right?
Correct, yes. Yeah.
And does it completely cut them, or does it just kind of cover it up so you don't really see the worst parts of it?
That's actually a wonderful question because I don't... I have that version, but I haven't played it. But I'm fairly confident, and keep in mind that I'm speculating here. So this is, you know, do your own research is what I always say. But my impression is that they would have been cut because, you know, I think in terms of ratings, it's more about like what the content is portraying. So if you still have like audio and it's still portraying kind of a full love scene and it's not just like a little bit of you know, someone in their underwear, like you said, or something, then that affects the rating that the game is going to get. And so I think that they just would have cut that entirely for the Saturn version, but I don't know for sure. One
thing I will say, and I you know, you mentioned a little earlier about how somebody reviewed the game trying to, you know, poke fun at it first and foremost, and then was like, oh, this is a good game. When are you familiar with Katawa Shoujo? It was like a Western developed visual novel, I guess, or the whole visual novel dating sim versus adventure thing is like a really confusing thing in the West, I think. But it was like a Western developed one that was mostly based around girls who had disabilities.
Yes. Yep, I know. I'm familiar with that.
I very much started that game thinking it was going to be a joke, and then was like, oh no, I like this kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
I'd say a lot of times people don't know how to talk about sexual content, and the best way to handle it is to laugh at it. I feel like that's the best way to handle something that you don't know what you're talking, like how to appreciate it, I guess, or something like that in some ways.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I ended up leaving the sexual content on for that game, even though at the time I kind of had a negative opinion of sexual content in games. And I find that there are things about some of those more sexual scenes that teach you certain things about characters. I think when like people are in bed, they have a personality as well in bed. And what happens in those scenes can help give you a better idea of who they are as a person as well. And so like having that whole bit cut, I think does kind of rob you a little bit of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, one of my buddies put it just in terms of like, I don't know, fan fictions and sort of, these fantasies and doujinshi and things like that fans really engage in. It's like, why are they so, keen on portraying maybe the romances of these characters going further than what we see in like a movie or a TV show or an anime or something that we've seen. And it's because, it's part of human experience and who we are. And those parts are missing from the story, right? And from the characters. And so we don't actually kind of get to explore that. And I think, as people become big fans of a thing, sometimes they really want to like flesh out the romance of the characters. And, and that's something that these games can do is not stop. They don't just sort of like, now we're going to cut to a different the morning after or something. They spend a little time, getting to know the characters in a way that, we don't always get to see a character, and sort of how they behave and who they are.
Anything else you want to say about Pia Carrot?
You should play Pia Carrot.
Yeah. It's translated. You can play it. It's in English.
It's translated. You can play it. It's in English. Yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend it.
One of 2 PC-FX games with fan translations, or are there more?
That's it. Just those 2, Pia Carrot and Choshin Heiki Zeroigar for now.
Okay, cool. I still need to get around to that. I have not done that. Burning games for old systems is kind of a weird thing. Although I believe there's is it Metafen or whatever? I think that's a decent emulator for PC-FX stuff now.
Metafen, absolutely. Yeah, no, Metafen's another good one. I treated it unfairly for a long time because, it is kind of a command line utility. It's not hard to run. You can run it with a bat file or something like that. It's really not that big a deal. And additionally, it's always had a problem with our translation of Welcome to Pia Carrot. The issue with it is really just that it does a parity check, basically. So it checks whether or not the information on the game is what it expects the information on the game to be. And I believe that it does that as like a corruption check, so like if the game is corrupted or something, it's not going to try playing it. But if you've made a fan translation, you've modified it, and so it bumps into that and it says, whoa, I can't play this game. So the real hardware actually does not do that. So that's behavior that Medefend is doing, well-intentioned, but it's not actually behavior that happens on real hardware. So, that mystery having been solved is nice, because I think on romhacking.net's forums, like somebody had discovered that and just found a way, like you can rebuild the disk sectors or something like that, and it'll like I don't know if it remakes the table of contents or it does something, and then when Medefend checks it, it says, oh, okay, the game is all there, and it lets you play it. So just an FYI.
So in terms of recommending for people how to play your fan translation of this game, is that the option you think is the best option for that? Or
I don't necessarily think it's the best option. I think you have 3 options and they're all equally valid. Mm-hmm. The easiest, I would say, is if you use, David's commercial emulator, Magic Engine FX. I forget how much it is.
I think it's like $20. Yeah. It's a pretty low price for getting into it, especially compared to the price of a real PC-FX.
Exactly, yeah. So, I would recommend, like, if you get that, like, we included I think it's a PPF file. It's basically, you just put it in the same directory, like the root directory of the emulator. Just drop it right in there, and then you can just put your PCFX, your Welcome to Pia Carrot disk in, or ROM image, and you can just play it that way. It's super easy. It soft patches it. You don't have to hard patch it at all.
Cool.
The other option would be MedDefend, and the third would be to just burn it and play it on a PCFX. Like I said, there's not a lot of video, so if you have a PCFX, I think I would play it on real hardware.
So, yeah, I have my own, like, I guess you could say, personal favorite adventure / visual novel kind of thing on this platform. And that's First Kiss Story. And it is a simple romance game, I guess you could say. There's like 13 girls, I think, but between the games. There's a ton of characters in there. You're like this high school kid, and you're going to this school. I don't really know I don't know Japanese, so I don't really know the circumstance. But you basically have all of February that you're at the school, that you get the time to try to date one of these girls. And you might be able to actually speak a little bit more to the premise of the story better than I can. To give you an idea of like how messed up I was originally when I started this game, when I looked up First Kiss Story's plot summary, I ended up pulling up the OVA, which is completely different. It's basically about like one of the girl's uncles, who is also her teacher, temporarily moving into this house and becoming a love interest for some reason, which is pretty far off from the game's plot.
Somebody came at me with that about the game on a forum, and I was just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, it's, at least in the game version, what happens is your dad is transferred away for his job for like a few months or something like that. So instead of just leaving you living on your own, like his, whatever 17, 18-year-old kid or something, he taps a friend of the family to let you stay with him. So you go and stay in her household. It's her and her two daughters, Mana and Minami, I think.
Kana Minami.
Kana, that's right, yeah. So that's kind of how you end up there, and you're actually going to the same school you'd been going to. So you're just finishing out your school year, but living with some different people.
Gotcha. And I'd say overall, like when you look at the type of stories that are happening in this game, it's pretty straightforward, simple stories. At least I feel like when you're looking at it as somebody who doesn't know the language, there's that one game, I forget what her name starts with an A, Ayaka. She has this whole story about like, you accidentally kind of call her like heavy at some point, and then so she's like, I'm not going to eat anymore. and even without the text, you can kind of figure out what's going on. And stuff like that. And that's what I liked about this game, is like, even though I don't really know any Japanese, like all the stories were followable. You mentioned earlier before we started talking, there's like a map system, so it's not really linear per se. So you can kind of like choose where you're going. And each of the locations are like marked with a heart if there's a potential event there or something like that. And that's kind of how I got through the game, is I basically looked at every location and saw if it had a heart, and then I went there and tried to figure out what happened. And then over time, I ended up 100%ing this game. So I basically would learn who was where on what day, and then make save files on a particular day to check every single location to see what was going on. So I had an idea of who I could interact with on that particular day.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I was likening it to the game that I've played that it reminds me of is White Album. Had a similar, system to that. And yeah, you were talking about your actions having an effect on, the relationship building and things like that. I mentioned this in my video about the game, but one of the things that I found just really surprising about it is, like, at one point I went to karaoke with Minami, and because I actually sort of skipped through her dialogue, later on she asks me a question, and she's like, "Oh, how did you like my singing?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, it was nice." And she's like, "No, you're lying. You weren't even paying attention." And I was like, wait a second. And so I loaded up a save, and then I didn't skip through the dialogue, and I let it all play out. And I said the same thing, and she said, "Oh, thank you very much." And I was like, you got to be kidding me, So there's some interesting things in it like that. And I think, it is a little unique. Like, isn't it when you get to the end, then you actually have to, I mean, this is very similar to Welcome to Pia Carrot, but before the game is actually ended, you kind of have to pick what character you're focusing on out of the ones that you've already kind of established relationships with, and then you can try to play out like the last portion.
Basically, I think it's like February 28th, you have to do everything you're going to do ahead of time, and then at that day, it's like you have a scene where you're on a balcony looking at the stars.
Yeah.
And then you get to choose a name. So yeah, it definitely has that. And then basically there's like a second section. How long that section is depends on the character. Some of them it's literally like an extra day. Other ones, like Kana's kind of the main character of the game. Hers goes on pretty long. I think it's like an extra month of content maybe for her.
Yeah, I feel like this game, because you said you've played like all of the routes in this, is that correct?
Yeah, I got all the at least I got all the like cutscene graphics, so I got every one for every girl.
I mean, it seems like in the same way that Welcome to Pia Carrot kind of caught my attention, it seems like this kind of caught yours. Like what, I don't know, what do you think about it? Like kind of kept you coming back to it and just wanting to see all the routes.
So the first thing is it's a Hunex game, and so I think I have a general fascination with the developers. So even though it's like very normal, it caught my eye more because I know who's working on this. They've had an extensive history. They're still around today. They still make a lot of Otome games. They still port visual novels all the time. And the reason it got this game in the first place is because there's like a hidden fighting game in it. And I kind of call it like Hunex's little mini Smash Brothers because it features characters from Blue Breaker, or a character from Blue Breaker, a character from Versus Story, and a character from a series called Private Idol. And so that was kind of what caught my attention. But I think what kept me going was just, I also did Minami's route first. And I think I was just surprised how much I understood what happened. Like for certain, I didn't know everything. But I was surprised that I had a beginning, middle, and end to that story. I've never tried to play a visual novel in Japanese before this. And I was surprised by my patience. And when I played another route, I was surprised that I kind of understood that. And I think that just kind of led to one thing to another. And eventually found myself at the end of that game. So I think we can go ahead and start wrapping up here. I was curious to know, what were you looking forward most to kind of checking out in the future on the platform?
So yeah, no, this is a great question. I translated recently a game for the Famicom called Mizase Pachi Pro Pachio-kun, and it's basically about this anthropomorphized pachinko ball that goes around and plays pachinko. In these pachinko parlors, you just have to clear like a set number of machines, move on to the next parlor, and I actually played through that whole game and finished it. And it has a history of being published on a lot of different consoles. There is a PC Engine, like HuCard version of Pachio-kun, I believe, and there's one on the PC-FX. It's called Pachio-kun FX, and I've actually really wanted to play that now since I have learned how to play pachinko. I really knew nothing about that. And I ended up reading a book on how to play pachinko. And then between that and my experience playing that Famicom game, I kind of like pachinko now.
Oh, cool.
So Pachio-kun FX is really cool too because like most of the games on the FX, it looks really nice. But it's funny because it has this really fantasy anime aesthetic too. All the characters are like, magicians or... just these weird fantastical characters that you're playing pachinko with. It looks really cool. But yeah, no, there's a lot of games I'd like to play on the PC-FX still. Definitely the other, those dating sims, like the ones that are, 18 only. Dokusei 2, Candy Bunny Extra DX. Candy Bunny Extra DX is developed by Cocktail Soft, and it's the Ken Bunny series is basically their big series that came before Welcome to Pia Carrot. So being such a Welcome to Pia Carrot fan, I feel like kind of obligated to check that out at least. It's the 5th game in the series. They did a whole lot of them. But that's kind of your typical, like, this goddess comes down from the heavens to help you get a girlfriend. Like she's your wingman. So I think that seems like a lot of fun. Something we didn't talk about at all is the PC-FX actually has a number of Otome games on it. One of them is Angelique Tenku no Requiem.
There are multiple Angelique games on the PC-FX, right?
Yeah, there are actually quite a lot of Angelique games. There's, I think, maybe 4 at least 3 or 4 Angelique games. I think it's 4, and then there's a couple others that kind of count as Otome games, like Comic Road, I think probably counts. You'd mentioned another one.
Albarea no Otome.
Yeah. And essentially, I think this ties into the game, kind of being marketed towards geek culture at the time and like kind of nerd culture, for like female otaku. I think a lot of them are really into manga or BL or just, romance stories for girls. And so like the Angelique series, they're by and large raising sims, kind of like we talked about Graduation and, those sort of games. But, if you play again, it's kind of like a princess competing with another princess to see who becomes the one who, takes over the kingdom. And there are all these handsome guys who, can be your, I don't know, they're your tutors or whatever, but you can romance a whole bunch of them. Those on their own are interesting. But this one in particular is an RPG. So it's kind of your classical fantasy RPG, but it's also an Otome game with like the Angelique characters. So I just think that's really neat. I've been wanting to check that out.
Albarea no Otome, I believe is a strategy RPG as well. So I think it's very similar that if there's Otome elements, you're building this character and you're building these relationships with these guys. And then there's supposedly strategy RPG elements. I've played it for about an hour and a half, have not seen a single shred of any kind of strategy RPG element. But I believe the back of the box that it's real. So one day I'll commit to it. But it's definitely one of those ones that I tried to put it in just to see what it's like. And then was like, maybe I'll come back to this later.
Yeah. No, and that's something, the PC-FX has a lot of RPGs on it. I made a little video where I just held up to the camera like a bunch of the RPGs on the system. I'd like to play some more of the RPGs. I played some of Miraculum, which is actually quite good from what I played of it. They call it kind of a traditional RPG, but the cutscenes in it does have those FMV cutscenes. I think they work really well in RPGs because being turn-based and not action games, like it's a little more welcome to have like this break and you get to sit back and see a flashy cutscene. I think that's nice. And there's a 3D dungeon crawler on the system called Boundary Gate that I've really been wanting to check out for a while. It's one of those games that kind of defies that 3D. The PC-FX can't do 3D a little bit because it does, software-wise. It's like a first-person dungeon crawler, and it has that 3D perspective. There is a PlayStation port of it that I think uses actual like 3D polygons, but I think the PC-FX version is still kind of calculating like 3D polygons for it. It looks quite nice, and what I read about it, it seems like the general consensus is like people are like, yeah, this is not a great RPG, but they're like, this is totally competent and fun. Like it's like a worth playing, like a thumbs up kind of game, but just it's nothing special.
I think you could say that about a lot of PC-FX games. You're going for a general aesthetic. Like there's special things about the games that appear on the PC-FX, but it's usually not the gameplay aspect. The gameplay aspect is usually a bit more straightforward.
Yeah. Yep.
The one game that I've personally kind of set my eyes on, and unfortunately, I only saw one eBay listing, so maybe the pricing's inaccurate, but it was a couple $100, was Ruruli Ra Rura. You've helped me.
Yeah. Well, it's that weird like Japanese RL sound. Yeah. So like if you're saying it in that Japanese way, it would be do do dee da do da.
Gotcha.
In more of an English sort of way, Ruruli Ra Rura. It's very hard to say. You sound like Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. But this basically looks like kind of like a 2D, almost maze game in some ways. You're kind of navigating these environments and there's enemies running around and there's like some puzzle solving you have to do. And it seems like you get like a series of characters, maybe about 6 or so from what I saw, and you can switch between them, I believe, on the fly. And so you can use different characters to fight enemies and then different characters to solve puzzles. And it seems like it's a short game. I don't know if it has multiple endings. The long play on YouTube was like 2.5 hours long, so it's definitely not a commitment. So I'm actually really excited to try that out someday. The boss fights are kind of interesting. It's like almost the entire background is just like a pre-rendered graphic. And it doesn't really fit the boss fight very well. So you have this weird boss like it's floating on the top of the screen, and then your character's like this little, Super Nintendo looking sprite walking around, but it just like does not fit the environment at all. It just looks really goofy and fun.
Yeah, the game almost feels like a Dojin game somehow. It's like I don't know, but what I can say just from what I've played of it, the opening theme song is really fun, and that's another one where like I like the cutscenes, like the whole atmosphere to it is really cool. So yeah, it seems like kind of a fun game.
So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on if somebody wanted to get into the PC-FX? Would you say just go the emulator route, or would you encourage people to get a physical system?
That's a hard question because, I think some of the charm of the system is the little white PC tower. It's not as big as it looks in a picture, Again, like, it's like we were there, like I was there. And so when you're there, you kind of want that same experience. But I mean, just certainly financially, and because a lot of the games I think are going to be less accessible if you don't know some Japanese, I think emulation is a very appropriate way of approaching this. And what's nice too is like there are a couple good emulators now between Mednafen and Magic Engine FX, and I don't know if anyone else. I know everyone's doing, what is it, RetroArch or something like that, and then it has. So I don't know. I think it uses Mednafen for its core for PC-FX. So you're basically doing it that way. And if you want to check these games out, like you should do that.
To wrap up, do you want to give any kind of final thoughts, or?
I mean, I'm coming at the PC-FX, I think as a fan and somebody who, has some nostalgia for it because I was lucky enough to kind of experience it back in the day a little bit. And I would say like my hope is that, one, I hope that people give the console a second look. I would like it if people recognize that if you don't know Japanese, I mean it doesn't necessarily mean that like the games are bad. If you can't understand them, it's frustrating. But there are some games you can play, and I would encourage people to take a chance and try out a game like Welcome to Pia Carrot, maybe if you're kind of on the fence about it. To see what that sort of a game is like. But I would also urge you like not to judge the library by those kind of games, because they're, like essentially there are 3 of that kind of game on the system. And, so, when you think of the PC-FX, I'd like folks to think of, the RPGs, simulation strategy adventure games on the system. And I'd like people to just recognize that when that anime boom was really huge in the mid 90s, there was like a console just for those anime geeks, which I think is pretty cool.
So as I do with every Multitap podcast, basically I give my guests about 5 minutes or so to kind of just talk about any game they want. Doesn't have to be necessarily or related to the topic at hand. So Matt, I want to see if you brought a game to discuss.
Yeah, so my game is Galaxy Robo. This is a tactical strategy game from the Super Famicom. And it's, I think it's published by Imagineer. I kind of forget if they're a publisher, developer, or what. But it's a fan translation project. This is something that was brought to me a long time ago. And I had the script kicking around on my hard drive. And it just, we were looking for projects to work on. And I was like, oh, what about this? And I ended up translating it and playing the game a lot. And I found it so much fun. It's your typical, I want to say Fire Emblem style tactical strategy game. It's cheesy, it's a little, I don't even know if I want to call it, it's not one of those games that's a classic. Even in Japan, it's actually pretty much forgotten. I don't think people really remember this game. But what I liked about it is it's kind of wonderfully cheesy in that it really apes from Star Wars. So, you're playing like this farm boy, and your town is attacked by brigands. So you and your brother and your dad go and fight them off with these mech robots, right? But then, of course, come to find out, I'm not really spoiling much, he's actually not your real dad. The ancient Robo fighter is this, this super powerful robot that was handed down to you from your real father. And, and it just goes from there into this like kind of galaxy spanning, like galactic epic, that, has princesses and evil emperors and all of the kind of cliched things that you would expect. But, something about it, the personality of it is super fun. And the gameplay is just great. You have a variety of units and different terrains, and each map has kind of, you're going to have a completely different strategy to it. Some of them have environmental elements to them that factor into the gameplay. There are different like clear conditions, so sometimes it's just kill all the enemies, but sometimes you have to do something kind of specific, and it gets tricky, it gets tough in some spots. I just found that over the course of the game, like the gameplay was so engaging. The difficulty was kind of, it spiked here and there, but I found that it made the game, I think, more enjoyable, and really just like the story was just so much fun, that I really enjoyed that game. And I found, since we've translated it, like there have been a couple of reviews, like there's one on romhacking.net, there's one on GameFAQs and stuff like that. So I know people are playing it and checking it out. I think finally someone actually did do kind of a let's play of it on YouTube, which was cool. But I do feel like, I'd like to see a little more out there. Somebody do a video review, or some more people like let's play it on YouTube, like, because it's a fun game. So I just wanted to put a plug in there for it. It's pretty great.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Matt. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.
I hope we have done some good work today in terms of helping people be a bit more appreciative of the PC-FX library. I know it's definitely over the years, it's been a little, over the last year particularly, it's been a little disappointing whenever I hear somebody say, oh, that's the game that is just the hentai machine. It's like, no, stop.
yeah, it's a little raw. It's a little hard to hear.
Yeah, so I'm hoping, I'm hoping somebody will listen to this and be like, okay, cool, I'm going to check out Kishin Zenki or something. I don't know.
I definitely agree. I'm right there with you.
So if people want to follow you, Matt, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to check my YouTube channel out, I haven't been posting content to it quite the same way that I used to, but you have to understand it's been like a close to a 10-year long journey here. So I think, like a lot of other YouTubers, I'm posting sporadic content, and it's a bit more of a kind of a personal gaming vlog for me. But I do try to talk about Japanese games, so if you're interested in that, or if you liked hearing about the PC-FX, I'd recommend that you check it out. And I have a channel for my fan translation stuff too, so if you happen to be interested in that, or you think you might be interested in that, you might check that out. I've been trying to do a little more gameplay on both my fan translation channel and my main channel. Actually, I just tried out streaming some Phantasy Star Online 2. I mean, this is going to have been, previous to this video, yeah. But I might be doing some streaming also, so you guys might want to check that out.
Cool. And in terms of any kind of reviews you've done on PC-FX games, I'll definitely have those, at least in the YouTube version, like linked in the parts where those games are talked about in the description, so you can look at his individual reviews if you want to on specific games. Because I think we've both done a mix of PC-FX reviews, but I don't think we've done a lot of overlap. So I think it'll be good to create a list of games we've both covered between those two. Yeah,
between the two of us, I think there's, we talk about a chunk of the library.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, in terms of my website, onecontrollerport.com is the website itself. If you're new here, I basically mostly talk about Japanese games. Their website really is just whatever I'm currently interested in at the moment. Sometimes that's military shooters on the original Xbox. 90% of the time, that's some random Japanese game I don't know what I'm doing with. But in terms of content that might be relevant, I've done, I'll link the videos, but I've done a Team Innocent review, a full one of that, as well as one of Hunex Fighters 98 that covers that game, as well as the later version of Unix Fighters 98 that came out on Windows 95. And then also I do some streams. Sometimes it also kind of fits my website of whatever I'm currently interested in. So, but I try to do a variety. I look at what I've been streaming and, choose games from different generations, different genres, things like that. So it's always something new going on. If you can just go to onecontrollerboard.com, you'll see basically everything I post there, categorized onto one site. So, well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and spending a good chunk of time with me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about a system I really enjoy.
Yeah, and if you play some PC-FX games at some point, let us know. Or if you've played games in the past, let us know what you think. Tell us about your individual game that you like. I think we both would be interested to hear about some games we haven't really spent much time with at the moment. So you can put that in the comments or however you want to get it to us, either on Twitter. I'm just One Controller Port on Twitter. And what's your Twitter again?
ROM Translator.
ROM Translator on Twitter for you. So reach out to us there too. And the links for the social media for us will be in the description as well. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye.